When a black American soldier saved a starving Japanese POW woman, he said 4 words that changed everything. "You are mine now." Not ownership. Sanctuary. The jungle perimeter. October 1944. A medic finds a woman collapsed in the brush, an escapee who should be shot on sight. He lifts her instead. But his own army treats him as less than human, and hiding her means risking execution for treason. A racist sergeant closes in. Accusations mount. The walls tighten around them both. She's the enemy. He's disposable. Together they're breaking every rule that says some lives don't matter. When the lie is exposed and chains are locked, who will believe that mercy isn't a crime? And when a woman kneels before her accusers to save the man who saved her, will either of them survive what comes next? Southern Luzon, Philippines. Late afternoon, October 1944. The air hung heavy with moisture. Private Elijah Carter wiped sweat from his neck and shifted the medical pack on his shoulders. His boots squelched through mud along the perimeter fence. The jungle pressed close on the other side of the wire. 2 other black medics walked ahead of him. They moved slowly under the weight of their supply crates. Their faces showed exhaustion. Nobody spoke. The white MPs had ordered this inspection. The MPs always found reasons to make the black medics do extra work. Elijah glanced toward the makeshift POW camp behind them. Rows of wire cages stretched across the clearing. Beyond them stood the segregated barracks. White soldiers slept on cots with mosquito nets. Black soldiers got mats on the ground. His jaw tightened. He focused on his boots instead. A rustling sound came from the brush near the fence. Elijah stopped. The other medics kept walking. They did not hear it. Another rustle. Something moved in the vines. Elijah looked back toward the MP patrol. They stood 50 yards away. They smoked cigarettes and laughed about something. They were not watching. He stepped off the path. The mud grabbed at his heels. He pushed through a gap in the wire where rust had eaten through the lower strands. The jungle swallowed him in 3 steps. The rustling came again. Closer now. Elijah crouched low. He moved a branch aside and froze. A woman lay crumpled in the brush. Her clothes were torn and filthy. Her cheeks were hollow. Her skin stretched tight over her bones. She was Japanese. Elijah's breath caught. He glanced back toward the path. The MPs would shoot an escapee on sight. They would probably shoot him too for not reporting her immediately. The woman's eyes fluttered open. She saw his uniform. Terror flooded her face. She tried to crawl backward but had no strength. Her hand clawed at the dirt. Boots thumped on the path behind him. The patrol was moving closer. Voices drifted through the trees. They were checking the fence line. Elijah looked at the woman. She stared back at him with eyes that expected death. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She was too weak to even beg. He made his choice in a heartbeat. Elijah crouched beside her and whispered urgently. His voice was low and steady. "Stay with me. Don't move." She did not understand his words, but his hands were gentle as he slipped his arms beneath her frail body. He prepared to lift her as footsteps approached through the jungle. Elijah carried the woman through the shadows. His heart hammered in his chest. She weighed almost nothing. Her head lolled against his shoulder. Her breathing was shallow and fast. He moved parallel to the main path, but stayed hidden in the brush. The MPs were still searching the fence line. Their voices echoed through the trees. Elijah counted 3 of them, maybe 4. He spotted the corrugated metal shed 30 yards ahead. Nobody used it anymore. The roof leaked, and the floor was covered in crates of rusted medical equipment. Battalion had forgotten it existed. Elijah shouldered the door open and slipped inside. Darkness swallowed them. He lowered the woman behind a stack of wooden crates. Her eyes were closed again. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Her pulse fluttered weakly. He uncapped his canteen and tilted water to her lips. She coughed. Her eyes snapped open and she thrashed weakly. She tried to push him away. "Easy," Elijah whispered. "Easy now." He offered the canteen again. This time she drank. Water dribbled down her chin. She stared at him with confusion and terror mixed together. Footsteps crunched outside. Elijah's hand froze on the canteen. The door rattled. "Check this one too," an MP called out. Elijah stood and moved toward the door. He blocked the view of the crates behind him. The door swung open. 2 white MPs stood silhouetted against the fading light. One held a flashlight. The other had his rifle ready. "What are you doing in here, boy?" The MP with the flashlight swept the beam across Elijah's face. "Checking for moldy medical kits, sir." Elijah kept his voice neutral. His hands stayed visible at his sides. "Sergeant Rollins sent me." The MP grunted. He shone the light past Elijah into the shed. The beam passed over the crates. It missed the woman by inches. "Smells like rat piss in here." "Yes, sir. That's why I'm sorting through it." The other MP spat tobacco juice into the mud. "Finish up and get back to your barracks. Don't make us come looking for you." "Yes, sir." The MPs turned and walked away. Their voices faded into the distance. Elijah waited until he could not hear their boots anymore. Then he released a breath he had not known he was holding. He turned back to the woman. She had pulled herself into a tight ball behind the crates. She trembled. Her eyes were wide and white in the darkness. Elijah knelt slowly. He held out his hands so she could see they were empty. Thunder rumbled somewhere over the hills. Rain was coming. "If anyone asks," he said quietly, "you're with me. You're mine now." She did not understand the words. But his tone was not threatening. It was protective. She stopped trembling quite as hard. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. Rain hammered the tin roof. The sound was deafening. Water leaked through rust holes and pooled on the concrete floor. Elijah sat with his back against the wall. The woman huddled 10 feet away behind the crates. He held out the canteen again. She hesitated. Her eyes darted between his face and the canteen. Finally, she reached forward and took it. Her hands shook. She drank in small sips this time. Elijah pulled a ration bar from his pocket. He broke it in half and offered 1 piece to her. She stared at it. Tears welled in her eyes. She took it and ate slowly. Each bite seemed painful. She was starving. That was obvious. But the bruises on her arms told another story. Someone had beaten her. The rope burns on her wrists were fresh. She had been restrained recently. Elijah kept his movements slow and predictable. He opened his medical pack and pulled out bandages and ointment. He pointed to her wrists. Then he pointed to the bandages. She understood. She extended her arms carefully. He cleaned the rope burns as gently as he could. She winced, but did not pull away. The wounds were infected. She needed real medical attention. But he could not take her to the camp hospital. They would arrest her immediately. When he finished bandaging her wrists, he tried to ask where she came from. Words were useless. He drew a crude map in the dirt with his finger. He pointed to where he thought the Japanese internment camps were located in the hills. She nodded. She pointed north. Then she made a gesture of running. She pointed to the bruises on her arms and shook her head violently. Elijah understood. She had fled from her own people. The Japanese military had brutalized their own civilians. He had heard rumors but never believed them. Propaganda on both sides made truth hard to find. The woman wrapped her arms around herself. She rocked slightly. Her lips moved in what might have been a prayer. Elijah watched her and felt something shift in his chest. She was not the enemy. She was just a person trying to survive. Footsteps squelched through the mud outside. Someone tried the door handle. It rattled but did not open. Elijah had locked it from inside. "Anybody in there?" A voice called through the rain. Elijah grabbed the lantern and blew it out. Darkness fell instantly. He moved silently to shield the woman. She pressed herself flat against the wall. "Medical inventory," Elijah called back. "Contaminated supplies, don't come in." A pause. Then the footsteps moved away. Elijah exhaled slowly. His hands shook slightly in the darkness. The rain pounded harder on the roof. Tomorrow he would have to figure out what came next. Elijah jerked awake to pounding on the door. Pale gray light leaked through the holes in the roof. The woman was already awake. She stared at the door with wide, frightened eyes. "Carter, open! This door!" Sergeant Rollins' voice cut through the morning air. "You missed roll call?" Elijah stood quickly. His muscles ached from sleeping on concrete. He gestured frantically for the woman to hide. She scrambled behind the crates and pulled a tarp over herself. Her breathing was too loud. Elijah prayed Rollins would not hear it. He unlocked the door and stepped outside. Sweat beaded on his neck despite the cool morning air. Rollins stood 3 feet away. His face was red. 2 other MPs flanked him. "Where the hell have you been?" Rollins stepped closer. He smelled like cigarettes and yesterday's whiskey. "Sorting medical scraps, sir." Elijah kept his eyes level. "The inventory Sergeant Davis assigned yesterday." "Nobody assigned you to spend the night out here." "Lost track of time, sir. Won't happen again." Rollins studied him. His eyes were cold and sharp. He was the kind of man who enjoyed finding reasons to punish black soldiers. Elijah had watched him do it a dozen times. "You're getting too comfortable, Carter." Rollins jabbed a finger into Elijah's chest. "One wrong step and I'll have you transferred to a frontline labor battalion, or worse." "Yes, sir." "You think you're smart, don't you?" Rollins' voice dropped to a whisper. "You think you can just do whatever you want out here. But I'm watching you, boy." Elijah said nothing. Anything he said would make it worse. Rollins glanced past him toward the shed door. "What's in there that's so damn important?" "Expired bandages, sir. Some surgical kits with rust damage." "Show me." Elijah's stomach dropped. He started to turn toward the shed. Inside, the woman would be barely hidden. One good look, and Rollins would see her. Another MP jogged up the path. "Sergeant, Captain needs you at the motor pool. Supply convoy just arrived." Rollins cursed under his breath. He looked between Elijah and the shed. Then he made his decision. "Get to the medic tents, now." He pointed toward the main camp. "If you're 1 minute late for inspection, I'll have you on a work detail until Christmas." "Yes, sir." Rollins turned and strode away. The other MPs followed. Elijah watched them go. His hands were clenched so tight his nails cut into his palms. He glanced back at the shed. The door was still ajar. He wanted to go check on the woman, but Rollins would be watching. He could not risk it yet. Elijah turned toward the medic tents. His boots felt heavy as he walked away from the shed. He would have to come back as soon as he could. The medic tents stank of disinfectant and sweat. Elijah stood in line with the other black medics. A white lieutenant walked slowly down the row. He inspected their packs and supplies. He found fault with everything. "These bandages are packed wrong." He pulled rolls of gauze from Elijah's pack and tossed them on the ground. "Start over." Elijah knelt and repacked them. His jaw ached from clenching his teeth. The lieutenant moved on to humiliate the next man. When inspection finally ended, The lieutenant confiscated a portion of their medical rations. He claimed the POWs did not need luxury treatment. Elijah watched morphine and antiseptic disappear into the lieutenant's personal supply bag. Nobody protested. Protesting was dangerous. Elijah followed the other medics toward the mess area. Filipino laborers moved equipment nearby. They kept their heads down. White officers stood in clusters, smoking and laughing. The segregation was absolute. Black soldiers ate separately. They used separate latrines. They were trusted with nothing important. In the mess line, Elijah grabbed a tin plate and a cup of weak coffee. The cook slapped watery beans onto his plate. A chunk of stale bread followed. Elijah pocketed the bread when the cook turned away. Rumors swirled through the line. 2 soldiers ahead of him talked in low voices. Heard they found signs of an escapee near the south fence. Japanese civilian. A woman, they're saying. MPs vowed to shoot on sight if they find her. Elijah's heart hammered. He kept his face blank. He took his plate and sat alone at the end of a bench. The bread felt heavy in his pocket. He would bring it to her. She needed food more than he did. A white MP walked past and kicked the leg of the bench. Elijah's coffee sloshed onto his lap. The MP laughed and kept walking. Other white soldiers joined the laughter. Elijah stared at his plate. Rage burned in his chest, but he forced it down. Getting angry accomplished nothing except punishment. He had learned that truth a long time ago. The lieutenant from earlier appeared at the entrance to the mess tent. He scanned the area. Then he headed toward the officers' area for lunch. This was Elijah's chance. He stood quickly and dumped his half-eaten food. He grabbed his coffee and walked casually toward the edge of camp. Nobody stopped him. Black medics were beneath notice unless they caused trouble. Elijah turned down the path toward the supply shed. The bread pressed against his ribs. He walked faster. She would be hungry. She would be terrified. He had left her alone all morning. The shed appeared through the trees. Elijah glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Then he hurried inside. The woman was awake and sitting upright. She had moved from behind the crates. She still looked terrified, but her eyes were sharper now. Food and water had helped. Elijah pulled the bread from his pocket and offered it to her. She stared at it for a moment. Then she bowed her head slightly. It was a gesture of gratitude. She took the bread and ate slowly. He sat across from her and pulled out his canteen. She drank when he offered it. Her hands were steadier today. The bandages on her wrists were still clean. Elijah needed to learn more about her. He pointed to himself. Elijah, he said clearly. She looked confused. He pointed to himself again. Elijah. Understanding dawned. She pointed to herself. Aiko. Aiko, he repeated. She nodded. It was a small thing, but now she had a name. She was not just a faceless enemy. She was Aiko. Elijah tried to ask more questions through gestures. Where did she come from? How long had she been running? Why did her own people hurt her? Aiko gestured north toward the hills. She made motions of being struck and tied up, her face twisted with remembered pain. Then she made a running motion with her fingers. She pointed to Elijah and pressed her hands together in a prayer gesture. He understood. She was thanking him for saving her life. Elijah shook his head. He pointed to the bandages on her wrists. Then he pointed outside towards the camp. He made a gesture of being caught. His face showed the seriousness of their situation. Aiko's expression fell. She understood too. They were both in danger. She reached out suddenly and touched his sleeve. Just a light touch. Her first moment of trust. Elijah met her eyes and nodded. He would protect her as long as he could. Outside, Sergeant Rawlins's voice echoed down the camp road. He was yelling at someone about a work detail. The voice was getting closer. Elijah stood quickly. He gestured for Aiko to stay hidden and stay quiet. She nodded and pulled the tarp over herself again. He slipped out of the shed and locked it behind him. His heart pounded. Rawlins appeared around the corner of another building. He saw Elijah and his eyes narrowed with suspicion. Elijah forced himself to walk normally toward the medic tents. He did not look back, but he felt Rawlins's gaze burning into his spine. "Tonight," he promised himself quietly. "I'll come back tonight." The sun dropped toward the horizon. Orange light streaked across the muddy camp. Elijah walked slowly toward the segregated barracks. His muscles ached from a day of pointless labor. Rawlins had assigned him to haul water barrels up from the creek. Other black soldiers trudged alongside him. Nobody spoke. Exhaustion hung over them. They had been treated like pack animals all day. Tomorrow would be the same. 2 white MPs stood near the latrine path. They leaned against a jeep and smoked cigarettes. Elijah tried to walk past without drawing attention, but one of them called out, "Hey boy, you hear about that Jap woman they're looking for?" Elijah stopped. "No, sir." "She escaped from one of the internment camps up north." The MP grinned. "Command says shoot on sight. Can't have enemy civilians wandering around." The other MP laughed. "I say let the Negro boys take the fall if she shows up. They're the ones who can't follow orders anyway." Both MPs thought this was hilarious. They slapped each other's shoulders and laughed harder. Elijah walked away before they could say more. His fists were clenched at his sides. Inside the barracks, the air was stifling. 20 men crowded into a space meant for 12. Elijah found his bunk. It was just a thin mat on the floor near the door. Officers got real beds. White. Enlisted men got cots. Black soldiers got mats. He lay down and stared at the ceiling. The wood was stained with mildew. A lizard crawled across a beam overhead. The MP's words echoed in his mind. If Aiko was discovered, they would blame him. They would call it dereliction of duty. Or worse, they might accuse him of treason. Black soldiers had been executed for less. But leaving her to die was not an option. Elijah had made his choice yesterday in the jungle. He would see it through. The soldier on the next mat over rolled onto his side. "You all right, Carter?" "Yeah." Elijah's voice was quiet. "Just tired." "Aren't we all?" The lights went out at 2200 hours. Darkness fell over the barracks. Men settled into sleep. Snoring began within minutes. Elijah lay awake and counted the minutes. At midnight, he slipped from his mat and crept toward the door. Nobody stirred. He had done this before. Night inspections of medical supplies were common enough that his absence would not raise immediate alarm. Outside, the camp was dark except for scattered guard posts. Elijah moved through the shadows. He knew every patrol route. He had memorized them over months of careful observation. The shed waited ahead in the darkness. Moonlight filtered through the clouds. Elijah moved carefully along the tree line. He carried a small lantern. A rolled blanket was tucked under his arm. Medical supplies filled his pockets. The shed door was still locked. He opened it quietly and slipped inside. The darkness was absolute. He lit the lantern and turned the flame low. Aiko was awake. She sat against the wall with her knees pulled to her chest. When she saw him, relief flooded her face. She had probably thought he was not coming back. Elijah set down the lantern and unrolled the blanket. He offered it to her. She took it and wrapped it around her shoulders. The nights were cold in the shed. He knelt beside her and opened his medical pack. The rope burns on her wrists needed fresh bandages. He removed the old ones carefully. The wounds were healing, but still raw. Aiko watched his face as he worked. She was learning to read his expressions. Tonight he seemed tired but determined. She reached out and touched the back of his hand. Just a brief touch. Her way of saying thank you again. Elijah met her eyes and nodded. He cleaned the wounds with antiseptic. She winced but did not pull away. He wrapped fresh bandages around her wrists and tied them securely. When he finished, he pulled out a canteen and a tin of crackers. She ate slowly while he sat across from her. The lantern cast long shadows on the walls. Artillery boomed somewhere far inland. The war continued even at night. Elijah listened to the distant thunder and wondered how long he could keep this secret. Every day increased the risk. Every hour brought them closer to discovery. But he could not turn her in. She was a person, not a prisoner, not an enemy, just a frightened woman who had fled from cruelty. Aiko finished eating and pulled the blanket tighter. She was already falling asleep. The first real warmth she had felt in days made her drowsy. Elijah watched her for a moment. Then he reached over and gently adjusted the blanket so it covered her better. Her breathing slowed and deepened. She was asleep. He sat with his back against the crates. The lantern flame flickered. Outside, the jungle hummed with night insects. Guard dogs barked occasionally in the distance. Elijah let his eyes close for just a moment. Exhaustion pulled at him, but he could not sleep. Not yet. He needed to stay alert in case someone came. He opened his eyes and looked at Aiko's sleeping form. Tomorrow he would have to figure out a better plan. This could not last forever. But for tonight, she was safe. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the darkness. "I'll figure something out." The lantern burned low, shadows danced on the walls, and outside, the war continued without pause. Dawn broke gray and humid. Elijah joined the mess line with the other black medics. His eyes burned from lack of sleep. He had stayed with Aiko until just before roll call. Then he had slipped back to his barracks, unseen. The Filipino cooks moved silently behind their serving stations. One older man with weathered hands ladled rice onto each plate. Elijah waited his turn. When he reached the front, he kept his voice low. "Extra ration for sick POWs in the medical ward." The cook studied his face for a long moment. His eyes were sharp and knowing. He had seen Elijah slip away at night. He had watched the pattern develop over days. The cook said nothing. He simply scooped extra rice into Elijah's tin. Then he reached beneath the counter and wrapped dried fish in a cloth. He placed it on top of the rice without a word. Elijah met his eyes. A silent understanding passed between them. The cook nodded once. Then he turned to serve the next soldier. Elijah moved away from the line quickly. His heart hammered in his chest. The Filipinos knew, or at least suspected, but they had not reported him. That meant something. It meant they understood what it was to be crushed under someone else's boot. He ate half his rice, standing near the edge of the mess area. The rest he saved for Aiko. The dried fish stayed wrapped in his pocket. It was a gift he had not expected, a small act of solidarity in a world designed to keep people divided. White officers gathered near the command tent. They drank real coffee and laughed about something. Black soldiers drank chicory water and kept their heads down. The distance between the two groups was more than physical. Elijah finished his rice and dumped his plate. He walked casually toward the supply path. Two other black medics headed toward the POW work detail. Nobody paid attention to him. The shed appeared through the morning mist. Elijah glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Then he opened the door and stepped inside. Aiko was awake She sat with the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. When she saw the food, her eyes widened. She recognized the dried fish immediately. It was food from home, food that reminded her of a life before war. Elijah handed her the tin of rice and the wrapped fish. She unwrapped it slowly. Her hands trembled. She brought the fish to her nose and breathed in the smell. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She looked up at Elijah with an expression he had never seen before. Not just gratitude, something deeper. Trust. She began to eat. The food disappeared quickly. Elijah sat across from her and watched. For the first time since he found her, she looked almost peaceful. Then the door handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Elijah stood in one smooth motion. His body blocked the view of Iko. She scrambled behind the crates without making a sound. The blanket disappeared with her. The door swung open. Sergeant Rollins filled the doorway. His face was red from the morning heat. Suspicion burned in his eyes. "What are you doing in here again, Carter?" "Sorting expired bandages, sir." Elijah kept his voice level. His heart slammed against his ribs. "Battalion wants inventory by Friday." Rollins stepped inside. His boots echoed on the concrete floor. He looked around the shed slowly. His gaze swept over the crates and the shadows. "You spend a lot of time in this shed." "Yes, sir. There's a lot of inventory." "That right?" Rollins moved closer to the crates. He was 3 feet from where Iko hid. "What's so interesting about old medical supplies?" "Nothing interesting, sir. Just following orders." Rollins kicked one of the crates. It scraped across the floor. Elijah forced himself not to flinch. Behind the crates, Iko would be pressed flat against the wall. She would be holding her breath. "You hiding something in here, boy?" "No, sir." "Because if I find out you're running contraband, I'll have you court-martialed." Rollins leaned close. His breath smelled like tobacco. "And we both know how that trial would go for someone like you." "Yes, sir." Rollins stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned toward the crates again. He reached for the top one. His hand was inches from pulling it aside. A voice shouted from outside. "Sergeant Rollins, MP at the gate needs you." Rollins froze. He cursed under his breath. "What now?" The MP appeared in the doorway. "POW refusing work detail. Captain wants you there." Rollins glared at Elijah one more time. "I'll be back. Don't get clever." He strode out of the shed. The MP followed. Their boots faded into the distance. Elijah released a breath he had been holding. His hands shook. He turned toward the crates. Iko emerged slowly. Her face was pale. She had heard the danger in Rollins's voice even without understanding the words. Elijah knelt beside her. He made a gesture of silence. She nodded. She understood. The danger was growing worse. Rollins suspected something. He would not stop looking. Elijah stood and moved to the door. He looked out carefully. The path was empty. But Rollins would return. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, but he would return. Elijah looked back at Iko. She watched him with frightened eyes. He could not keep her here much longer. The shed was compromised. He needed a new plan. "Stay quiet," he whispered. She did not understand the words, but she understood his tone. He slipped out of the shed and locked it behind him. His mind raced with possibilities. None of them seemed safe. But doing nothing was the most dangerous choice of all. The sun beat down without mercy. Elijah stood at the edge of the POW work detail area. His medical bag hung from his shoulder. A dozen Japanese prisoners dug drainage ditches under the watch of armed guards. The work was brutal. Men swung pickaxes in the heat. Sweat soaked through their thin uniforms. MPs stood in the shade and watched. If a prisoner slowed down, they shouted threats. Elijah was supposed to monitor the prisoners for signs of heat stroke or injury. It was humiliating work. He was trained to heal, but used to babysit forced labor. The white medics never got these assignments. A supply truck rumbled up the road. It stopped near the work area. 2 guards dragged a new prisoner from the back. The man stumbled when they pushed him forward. He was gaunt and hollow-eyed. Hatred burned on his face. The guards shoved him towards the ditch. "Get to work." The new prisoner stood rigid. He looked around the camp with contempt. His gaze swept over the black soldiers. His lip curled with disdain. Elijah watched him carefully. Something about the man seemed familiar. Not his face, but the way he carried himself, the way he looked at everyone as beneath him. One of the POWs collapsed near the ditch. Elijah grabbed his bag and hurried over. The man had heat exhaustion. Elijah checked his pulse and gave him water. The MPs yelled at the man to get back to work. "He needs rest," Elijah said firmly. 5 minutes in the shade." The MP glared but waved his hand. 5 minutes, then back in the ditch. Elijah helped the prisoner to the shade. While he worked, he heard voices behind him. The new prisoner was speaking in Japanese to another POW. The words were harsh and angry. The other prisoner responded quietly. He gestured toward the camp perimeter. The new prisoner's face twisted with rage. He spat on the ground and said something sharp. Elijah caught one word. A name. Aiko. His stomach dropped. He turned slowly and looked at the new prisoner. The man was staring towards the south fence, the area near where Elijah had found her. The new prisoner muttered something else. His tone was venomous. He called Aiko shameful, a disgrace, a woman who abandoned her duty. Elijah's blood went cold. This man knew her. He knew she had escaped. And now he was inside the camp where he could talk to guards, where he could point fingers. The 5 minutes ended. The collapsed prisoner stood shakily and returned to work. Elijah packed his medical supplies. His hands moved automatically, but his mind raced. He had to warn Aiko, had to tell her someone dangerous had arrived, someone who wanted her found. But he was stuck here for another 2 hours. He could not leave the work detail without permission, and requesting permission would draw attention. Elijah glanced toward the shed in the distance. It seemed impossibly far away. He turned back to the work detail and forced himself to wait. But every minute felt like an hour. Elijah burst through the shed door. Aiko jumped at the sudden noise. She had been sitting near the wall. Now she pressed herself back against the crates. He closed the door and locked it. Then he turned to her. His face showed urgency. Aiko's expression shifted to fear. She knew something was wrong. Elijah knelt in front of her. He tried to think of how to explain. He pointed towards the POW camp. Then he made a gesture of a person walking. A new person. Aiko's eyes widened. She understood. A new prisoner. Elijah nodded. Then he said her name. Aiko. He pointed north toward where she had escaped from. Then he made an angry gesture, a threatening gesture. Understanding flooded her face. She knew immediately who he meant. Her whole body went rigid. She began shaking her head violently. Her breathing came faster. She grabbed Elijah's sleeve and spoke rapidly in Japanese. He could not understand the words, but the terror in her voice was clear. She was telling him about someone who had hurt her. She pointed to the bruises on her arms. Then she made a gesture of someone hitting. She showed him rope burns on her wrists. She made a gesture of being dragged. This new prisoner had been one of her tormentors, one of the Japanese officers who ran the civilian internment camp. He had beaten her, tied her up, maybe worse, and now he was here. inside the American camp, close enough to recognize her if he saw her. Elijah's jaw clenched. He had to get her out of the camp. The shed was no longer safe. The forged paperwork plan had to happen now. Not next week, not tomorrow. Now. But Aiko was gripping his sleeve. Her eyes were wide with panic. She was begging him not to leave. Not yet. She was too frightened to be alone. Elijah looked at her trembling hands on his sleeve. It was the first time she had initiated real contact. The first time she had asked him for comfort instead of just accepting protection. He covered her hand with his own. His touch was gentle. He nodded to show he understood. He would stay, at least for a little while. Outside, the afternoon sun began its descent. Shadows lengthened across the camp. Voices drifted past on the paths. Normal camp business continued. Nobody knew that inside this forgotten shed, two people lived in constant fear of discovery. Elijah sat beside Aiko. Not too close, but close enough that she could feel his presence. She slowly released his sleeve, but stayed near. Her breathing gradually calmed. He would find a way to save her. He had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. Elijah lay on his mat and stared at the ceiling. Around him, other black soldiers talked quietly. Some played cards. Others wrote letters home that would be censored before mailing. Private Lewis sat on the mat beside Elijah. He was a transport driver with connections throughout the camp. He knew people. He knew how things worked behind the official regulations. "You look like a man with problems," Lewis said quietly. Elijah turned his head. "Just tired. We're all tired." Lewis shuffled a deck of cards absently. "But you got that look. The look of someone in deep water?" Elijah said nothing for a moment. Then he made a decision. "I need help with something." "What kind of help?" "The kind that doesn't get talked about." Lewis stopped shuffling. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I'm listening. I need paperwork, civilian work permit, for a Filipino laborer." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "We got plenty of Filipino laborers. What's special about this one?" "Nothing. Just need the paperwork processed quickly." "Quickly costs extra." Lewis named a price. It was most of what Elijah had saved over 3 months. "And it's risky. MPs are checking papers more carefully since that Japanese woman escaped." Elijah's stomach tightened at the mention of the escapee. "Can you do it or not?" Lewis studied him for a long moment. "I can do it. But if this goes sideways, I don't know you." "Understood. I'll need a name and a description." "Tomorrow," Elijah said. "I'll get you the details tomorrow." Lewis nodded and went back to shuffling his cards. The conversation was over. Elijah turned back to the ceiling. He had just spent money he could not afford. For paperwork, that might not work. To save a woman he barely knew. But there was no other choice. The barracks door banged open. A soldier ran inside. His face was flushed with excitement. "Rollins is doing surprise inspections tonight." The words hit Elijah like a punch. Surprise inspections meant they could search anywhere. Check anywhere. The shed could be next. Men around the barracks cursed and scrambled to hide their contraband. Extra rations, stolen cigarettes, letters from sweethearts back home that were too personal for censors. Elijah stood quickly. He grabbed his jacket. "Where's he starting?" "Supply tents near the motor pool." That gave Elijah maybe 20 minutes, maybe less. He had to move Aiko before Rollins reached the shed. Had to get her somewhere safer. He headed for the door. Lewis caught his arm. "Whatever you're mixed up in, be careful." "I will." Elijah pushed out into the night. The camp was dark, except for scattered lights near the guard posts. He ran toward the shed. His boots pounded on the packed dirt. Behind him, voices echoed. Rawlins's inspection team was moving through the camp. They were getting closer. Elijah reached the shed, breathless. He yanked the door open. Aiko was already standing. She had heard the commotion outside. She knew something was wrong. "We have to move, now." Elijah grabbed the blanket and shoved it under his arm. He gestured for her to follow. She understood the urgency. She moved to the door without hesitation. Elijah checked the path outside. Empty. But lanterns bobbed in the distance. Rawlins's team was 2 buildings away. He grabbed Aiko's hand and pulled her out of the shed. They ran along the edge of the tree line. Aiko stumbled on the rough ground. Elijah caught her and kept moving. An unused water tower stood at the far edge of the camp. It had been abandoned after engineers found cracks in the foundation. Nobody went there anymore. Beneath the tower was a crawl space, just big enough for someone to hide. Elijah led Aiko to the tower. He lifted the wooden access panel. The space beneath was dark and muddy. She looked at it and then at him. Fear crossed her face. "I know," he whispered, "but it's safer than the shed." She did not understand his words, but she read his expression. She nodded and climbed down into the space. Mud squelched under her hands. She pressed herself into the corner. Elijah handed her the blanket. Then he made a gesture of silence. Pressed his finger to his lips. She nodded and pulled the blanket around herself. She was shaking from cold and fear. He lowered the access panel. Darkness swallowed her. Elijah stood and brushed dirt from his pants. His heart hammered against his ribs. Lantern light appeared through the trees. Voices carried on the night air. Rawlins and his MPs were getting closer. Elijah counted at least 4 men, maybe more. He forced himself to walk casually back towards the main camp. If he ran, they would chase him. He had to look like he belonged here. "Carter," a voice called out. "What are you doing out here?" Elijah turned. An MP stood 20 feet away. His rifle was unslung but not aimed. "Checking the water supply, sir. Medical team needs clean water for sterilizing equipment." The MP studied him. "You're out of bounds." "Yes, sir. Heading back now." The MP jerked his head toward the barracks. "Get moving." Elijah walked past him. He did not look back at the water tower, did not give any sign that something precious was hidden beneath it. Behind him, the inspection team moved toward the shed. He heard the door bang open, heard Rawlins curse when he found it empty, heard them search the crates and find nothing. Elijah kept walking. His hands were clenched so tight his nails drew blood, but his face stayed calm. Aiko was hidden. For tonight, she was safe. Tomorrow he would figure out the next step. Aiko pressed herself against the wooden support beams. Mud soaked through her clothes. The darkness was absolute. She could not see her own hands in front of her face. Above her, footsteps moved across the camp. Voices rose and fell. Men shouted orders. Doors slammed. The inspection team was searching everywhere. She pulled the blanket tighter and tried to control her breathing. Each breath felt too loud. She was certain someone would hear her, would find her, would drag her out into the light. Her mind filled with memories of the internment camp. The Japanese officers who ran it had been brutal. They called civilian internees weak, called them disloyal for not dying for the emperor. The beatings came daily. The rations barely kept people alive. The officer who had ordered her tied up was here, in this camp. She had recognized Elijah's description immediately. That man's face was burned into her memory. He had smiled while he hurt her. If he found her now, he would tell the Americans she was dangerous. A spy, a threat. They would believe him, and Elijah would be punished for hiding her. Elijah, the American soldier who saved her when he should have shot her, who brought her food and water, who bandaged her wounds, who looked at her with something she had not seen in months. Humanity. She did not understand his words, but she understood his actions. He was risking everything for her. A person who should be his enemy. Someone he had no reason to protect. Footsteps approached the water tower. Aiko froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She pressed her hand over her mouth to silence her breathing. A light swept across the tower supports. Someone was inspecting the area. The light moved closer. It passed inches from the access panel. "Anything?" a voice called out. "Just an old water tower. Nobody's been here in months." "Check it anyway. Rollins wants every corner searched." The access panel rattled. Someone was trying it. Aiko closed her eyes and prayed to gods she wasn't sure existed anymore. She prayed to Elijah's God, to any god who would listen. The panel rattled again. Then the footsteps moved away. "It's stuck, probably swollen from the rain. Leave it. Let's check the next area." The voices faded. The light disappeared. Aiko released her breath slowly. Tears ran down her face in the darkness. She was safe. For now. She pulled the blanket over her head and waited. Waited for the inspection to end. Waited for morning. Waited for Elijah to come back. She had never trusted anyone before. Not since the war began. But she trusted him now. She had to. He was all she had. Dawn light filtered through the clouds. Elijah stood outside the camp office. Private Lewis emerged with a folded paper in his hand. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching. Then he handed it to Elijah. "Filipino civilian work permit. Name, Maria Santos, kitchen assistant." Lewis kept his voice low. "The clerk I know stamped it official, but it won't hold up under serious scrutiny." "How long will it work?" "Few days, maybe a week if you're lucky. Don't push it." Elijah unfolded the paper and studied it. The stamp looked real. The signature was illegible but official looking. It might work. It had to work. He paid Lewis the agreed price. Most of his savings disappeared. Lewis pocketed the money and walked away without another word. Elijah headed towards the water tower. The camp was coming to life around him. Soldiers moved to mourning formations. Filipino laborers gathered for work assignments. The daily routine continued as if nothing had changed. He reached the tower and checked that no one was watching. Then he lifted the access panel. Aiko looked up at him from the darkness. Her face was pale and streaked with mud, but she was alive. He helped her climb out. She stumbled when she stood. A night in the crawl space had stiffened her muscles. Elijah steadied her and handed her the forged paperwork. She looked at it without understanding. He mimed working in a kitchen, carrying pots, washing dishes. She nodded slowly. She was willing to try anything. Elijah led her towards the civilian labor area. His heart pounded with each step. Filipino workers gathered near the kitchen tents. Elijah positioned himself between Aiko and the nearest MP. A Filipino overseer looked at her paperwork. His eyes narrowed slightly. He knew something was wrong, but he said nothing. He simply nodded and pointed toward the kitchen. Aiko moved into the line of workers. She kept her head down. Elijah watched from a distance. It was working. She was blending in. Then he saw movement across the yard. The Japanese informant, the bitter officer who knew Aiko. He was being marched to a work detail by guards. The man's head turned as he scanned the camp. His gaze swept over the civilian workers, over the kitchen area, over Aiko. Their eyes met across the yard. Recognition flashed on his face. His entire body went rigid. He opened his mouth to shout. Elijah's blood turned to ice. Trouble was coming. The Japanese informant's mouth opened. His arm rose to point across the yard. Elijah saw it happening in slow motion. Everything was about to collapse. But the guard beside the informant shoved him forward. "Move, no talking." The informant stumbled. He tried to turn back toward the kitchen area. The guard hit him with a rifle butt. Not hard enough to injure, just hard enough to make a point. "I said move!" The informant had no choice. The guards marched him away toward the work detail, but his head kept turning back. His eyes stayed locked on the kitchen area, on Aiko. Elijah's stomach churned. The informant would report her as soon as he got the chance. Maybe at the next water break. Maybe when guards changed shifts. But he would talk, and when he did, MPs would come looking. Elijah moved quickly towards the kitchen tents. Aiko stood near a stack of cooking pots. Her hands trembled as she tried to lift one. A Filipino woman beside her took the pot gently and showed her how to carry it properly. Elijah caught Aiko's eye. He made a subtle gesture. "Follow me. Now." She set down the pot and moved toward him. They walked along the back of the kitchen tents, away from the main yard, away from where the informant had seen her. "He saw you," Elijah whispered. She did not understand the words, but she read his face. She knew the danger had escalated. They reached a narrow path between two storage buildings. Elijah stopped and looked back. The informant was being loaded onto a work truck. But an MP stood near the truck. The informant was speaking urgently to him. The MP's expression changed. He turned and looked toward the kitchen area. His hand moved to his radio. "No," Elijah breathed. "Not yet." The MP started walking towards the kitchen. Fast, purposeful. He was coming to investigate. Elijah grabbed Aiko's hand. They could not run. Running would confirm guilt. But they could not stay here either. The MP would search the kitchen, would question the workers, would find her. Footsteps approached from behind them. Heavy boots on packed earth, multiple sets of boots. Sergeant Rollins appeared at the end of the path. Two other MPs flanked him. They had cut off the escape route. Rollins's face showed grim satisfaction. He had been waiting for this moment. "Carter," his voice was cold. "Step away from the woman." Elijah did not move. He kept himself between Rollins and Aiko. His heart hammered, but his feet stayed planted. "I said step away. She's a civilian worker, kitchen assistant. Her paperwork is in order." Rollins smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Is that right? Then she won't mind answering a few questions." He strode forward and grabbed Aiko's wrist. She cried out. Rollins jerked her arm up and examined her face closely. He noted her features, her terrified expression, the way she flinched from his touch. "This ain't no Filipino." Rollins's voice was triumphant. "This is that Japanese woman everyone's looking for." Aiko tried to pull her arm free. Rollins tightened his grip. She stumbled and nearly fell. Elijah moved forward instinctively. An MP blocked his path with a rifle. "Don't," the MP warned. Rollins forced Aiko to stand straight. He spoke slowly and loudly, the way ignorant men speak to people who do not know their language. "Where did you come from?" Aiko's eyes were wide with terror. She tried to bow, tried to show submission, but Rollins shook her arm roughly. She gasped in pain. "Let her go." Elijah's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through him. "You're hurting her." "Hurting her?" Rollins laughed. "She's the enemy. She's lucky I don't shoot her right here." More MPs gathered. Word was spreading through the camp. A crowd formed at a distance. White soldiers came to watch. Black soldiers stood further back. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. "Where did you find her, Carter?" Rollins released Aiko, but positioned himself to block her escape. "How long you been hiding her?" I didn't hide anyone. She's a registered civilian worker. Show me the paperwork. Elijah pulled the forged document from his pocket. His hand did not shake. He handed it to Rollins. The sergeant studied it carefully. His eyes narrowed. This is fresh, dated yesterday. Rollins held it up to the light. Convenient timing. Right after that POW identified her. The paperwork is legitimate. The paperwork is fake. Rollins tore it in half. The pieces fluttered to the ground. And you're under arrest for harboring an enemy combatant. Aiko understood what was happening even without comprehending the words. She saw Elijah's danger, saw him being blamed. She stepped forward and spoke in broken English, words she had been practicing in her mind. He save me. He good man. Please. The watching soldiers murmured. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked angry. Rollins's face flushed dark red. So you can talk. He grabbed her arm again. Makes this easier. You're both coming with me. On what charge? Elijah demanded. Treason, consorting with the enemy, dereliction of duty. Rollins counted them on his fingers. Take your pick. 2 MPs grabbed Elijah's arms. He did not resist. Resisting would only make things worse. They pulled his arms behind his back. Cold metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Another MP took Aiko by the shoulder. She looked back at Elijah with desperation in her eyes. He tried to give her a reassuring nod, but he was not sure of anything anymore. MP Bunker, now. Rollins pointed down the path. And someone find Lieutenant Markham. Tell him we caught the escapee. The MPs marched them through the camp. Soldiers parted to let them pass. Some faces showed curiosity. Others showed satisfaction. A few showed something that might have been sympathy. Elijah kept his head up as they walked. He would not give Rollins the satisfaction of seeing him broken. Not yet. The MP bunker loomed ahead, a squat concrete building with barred windows. The door stood open. Darkness waited inside. The bunker was cold despite the tropical heat. Elijah sat chained to a metal chair. His wrists were raw where the cuffs bit into his skin. Aiko sat across the room. A guard stood over her. Rollins paced between them. His boots echoed on the concrete floor. He had been interrogating them for an hour. His questions came in waves, accusations mixed with threats. How long you been hiding her? I told you, she's a civilian worker. Don't lie to me, boy. Rollins slammed his hand on the table. That Jap prisoner identified her. Said she escaped from an internment camp 2 weeks ago. I wouldn't know about that. You wouldn't know. Rollins leaned close. His breath was hot and sour. You just happened to find her paperwork. Just happened to sneak around at night. Just happened to be protecting her when we caught you. Elijah said nothing. Anything he said would be twisted against him. Rollins straightened and turned to Aiko. And you? What were you doing with this soldier? What did he want from you? Aiko did not understand all the words, but she understood the insinuation in his tone. Her face went pale. She shook her head violently. Help. Only help. Her English was broken but desperate. No bad. He good. Good? Rollins laughed. It was an ugly sound. Negro soldiers ain't good for anything except labor, and you expect me to believe he was just helping you out of kindness? He turned back to Elijah. His expression was calculating. Here's what I think happened. I think you found this woman and saw an opportunity. I think you forced yourself on her, kept her hidden so she couldn't report you. That's a lie. Is it? Rollins crossed his arms. Because that's the story I'm putting in my report. Assault of an enemy civilian by a Negro soldier. Court-martial offense. Probably execution. Elijah's blood ran cold. Rollins was not just trying to punish him. He was trying to destroy him completely. Frame him for something unforgivable. Ensure the harshest possible sentence. You can't prove that. Don't need proof. Just need suspicion. Rollins smiled. And everyone knows how Negro soldiers are. Command will believe my version over yours. Aiko stood suddenly. The guard grabbed her shoulder, but she shook him off. She stepped toward Rollins. Her whole body trembled, but her voice was firm. No, you lie. He saved my life. She struggled for words. He see me. Person, not enemy. He good man. Rollins backhanded her across the face. The slap echoed in the bunker. Aiko fell to her knees. Blood trickled from her split lip. Elijah lunged forward. The chains jerked him back. The chair scraped across the floor. Rage burned through him. Don't touch her! Rollins turned to him with satisfaction. There it is. The truth comes out. You care about this enemy woman more than your own uniform. A jeep engine rumbled outside. Voices called out. Footsteps approached the bunker door. Rollins cursed under his breath. The door opened. Lieutenant Markham entered. He was a white officer. But unlike Rollins, he had a reputation for fairness. He looked around the bunker, took in the scene. His expression hardened. Sergeant Rollins, what is happening here? Lieutenant Markham ordered everyone moved to the administrative tent. Elijah was unchained and allowed to sit. Aiko was given water and a cloth for her bleeding lip. Rollins protested, but Markham overruled him. This requires a proper hearing, Markham said firmly, not a backroom interrogation. The administrative tent was larger and had witnesses. Filipino civilians were called in to give statements. They came reluctantly. Speaking against authority was dangerous, but one by one they stepped forward. An older cook spoke first. His voice was quiet but clear. Private Carter always treat everyone with respect. He give extra food to sick prisoners. Never take anything for himself. A younger woman testified next. I see him help the new worker. The woman. She was frightened. He was gentle with her, not threatening. Another man added his voice. Private Carter is good soldier. Better than many. He see people as people. Markham listened carefully. He took notes. Rollins stood in the corner. His face was dark with anger. This was not going the way he planned. Markham turned to Aiko. Can you tell me what happened? How did you meet Private Carter? Aiko looked at Elijah. He nodded encouragement. She took a breath and spoke slowly. Her English was rough but understandable. I escape from camp. Japanese camp, very bad. They hurt me. Tie me. No food. She showed the scars on her wrists. I think I die. Then he find me. She pointed to Elijah. Tears ran down her face. He could kill me, should kill me, but he give water, give food, hide me from... She gestured to indicate Rollins and the MPs, from angry men. She stood and moved to the center of the tent. Then she knelt formally, the traditional Japanese bow of deepest respect. She pressed her forehead to the ground. He saved my life. He see me as person, not enemy. The tent was silent. Even the hostile soldiers looked uncomfortable. This was not the story they expected, not the narrative Rollins had tried to create. Markham cleared his throat. Private Carter, do you have anything to add? Elijah stood. His voice was steady. I found a starving woman who had been tortured by her own people. I could not let her die. The regulations say shoot on sight, but regulations don't account for humanity. You broke military protocol. Yes, sir, I did. You understand the consequences could be severe. Yes, sir. Markham studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to Rollins. Sergeant, your accusations of assault appear to be completely unfounded. Multiple witnesses contradict your version of events. Sir, he still harbored an enemy. He showed mercy to a civilian escapee who posed no military threat. Markham's voice was sharp. That is not treason. That is conscience. Rollins's jaw clenched. Sir, with respect, you're relieved of duty pending investigation. Markham cut him off. Your conduct during this interrogation was inappropriate, striking a defenseless woman, threatening a soldier under your command. These actions will be reviewed. 2 MPs stepped forward. Rollins understood what was happening. He was being removed, escorted away. His power was gone. He glared at Elijah with pure hatred. This ain't over. But it was. The MPs led him out of the tent. Markham turned to Elijah and removed the handcuffs. You're free to return to duty, but I expect you to follow protocol from now on. Yes, sir. Elijah looked at Aiko. She was still kneeling, still pressed to the ground. He wanted to help her up, to tell her she was safe, but he could not. Not yet. Elijah stepped outside. The sun was low on the horizon. Orange light stretched across the camp. Other soldiers moved about their evening duties. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal. Rollins was being escorted to a jeep by 2 MPs. He turned and locked eyes with Elijah. The hatred in his gaze was venomous. He leaned close to Elijah as he passed. You think you won? Rollins's whisper was barely audible. Negro soldiers don't get justice. Markham's just covering his own ass. Soon as the heat dies down, you're done. Elijah said nothing. Words would not change anything. His silence was more powerful than any response he could give. Rollins spat at his feet. You'll regret this, both of you. The MPs pulled him toward the jeep. He went, but his eyes stayed fixed on Elijah until the vehicle pulled away. Dust rose in its wake. Markham emerged from the tent. His expression was stern. Private Carter, walk with me. They moved away from the tent, away from listening ears. Markham's voice was low but firm. What you did was dangerous, not just for you, for everyone involved. I know, sir. Do you? Markham stopped and faced him. Rollins is right about one thing. The system is not designed to protect men like you. You took an enormous risk. Yes, sir. But you also did something decent. Markham's expression softened slightly. Something human in a place that's forgotten how to be human. Elijah did not know how to respond. Compliments from white officers were rare. He simply nodded. The woman. Aiko. She'll be transferred to a humanitarian mission preparing civilians for repatriation. Markham handed him a paper. They'll process her properly, give her food and medical care. She'll be safe there. When does she leave? Dawn tomorrow. A convoy is heading north. She'll go with them. Tomorrow. That meant tonight was the last time he would see her. The last chance to make sure she understood. To say whatever needed to be said. Can I speak with her before she goes? Markham hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, in the medical tent where there are witnesses, I can't give you privacy, but I can give you a few minutes. Thank you, sir. Markham turned to leave. Then he stopped. Carter, you could have walked away, left her to die. Nobody would have blamed you, but you didn't. That takes courage most men don't have. He walked away before Elijah could respond. Elijah stood alone in the fading light. His hands trembled now that the adrenaline was wearing off. He had been so close to execution, so close to losing everything. But Aiko was safe. That was what mattered. She would live. She would go home eventually. And maybe that was enough. He headed towards the medical tent. The sun continued its descent. Shadows lengthened across the camp. Tomorrow she would be gone. Tonight, he needed to make peace with that. Aiko sat on a cot in the corner of the medical tent. A nurse had cleaned and bandaged her wounds properly. She wore clean clothes. Someone had given her a bowl of rice and vegetables. She ate slowly. Elijah entered through the tent flap. Lieutenant Markham stood near the entrance, not close enough to hear conversation, but close enough to ensure propriety. This was the compromise. Aiko looked up when she saw Elijah. Relief flooded her face. She started to stand, but he gestured for her to stay seated. He pulled a stool close and sat facing her. "You're leaving tomorrow," he said quietly. She understood the tone, if not all the words. She nodded. "Tomorrow." The word was careful on her tongue. "They'll take you somewhere safe, a humanitarian camp. No guards, no prison, just shelter until the war ends." She studied his face, trying to understand. He drew a simple picture on a scrap of paper, a building with a red cross, people receiving food and medicine. She nodded. She understood. "You'll be safe there," he repeated. Then he pointed to himself. "I'll stay here." Understanding dawned. They were separating. This was goodbye. Her expression crumbled. Tears welled in her eyes. She gripped the edge of the cot. "You..." She struggled for words. "You safe now?" The question was simple but cut deep. She was worried about him. After everything she had been through, after he had endangered her multiple times through his decisions, she was asking if he would be safe. "I'll be fine," he lied. He did not know if that was true. Rawlins had allies, racist soldiers who resented black medics. The danger was not over, but she did not need to carry that burden. She reached out slowly and touched his hand. Just a light touch. Her fingers rested on his knuckles for a moment. It was the most direct contact they had ever had, a gesture of gratitude that transcended language. "You save me," her voice broke. "You give back life." Elijah turned his hand over so his palm faced up. She placed her hand in his. They sat like that for a long moment. Two people who should have been enemies. Two people whose connection had defied every rule of war. "I had to," he said quietly. "I couldn't let you die." She did not understand all the words, but she understood the meaning. She squeezed his hand gently, then released it. Markham cleared his throat from the entrance. Time was up. The brief conversation was over. Elijah stood. Aiko stood as well. She bowed deeply, the formal Japanese bow of profound gratitude. Elijah did not bow back. Instead, he placed his hand over his heart, an American gesture of sincerity. She understood. She smiled through her tears. It was the first time he had seen her smile. It transformed her face, made her look younger, made her look like the person she had been before war destroyed her world. "Be safe," he whispered. She nodded. "You too." He turned and left the tent. The night air was cool. Stars appeared overhead. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. The war continued. But in this small moment, 2 lives had been saved. His and hers, that was enough. Gray light crept across the eastern sky. Elijah stood near the motor yard. A small convoy of trucks waited with engines idling. Filipino relief workers loaded supplies, medical equipment, food, blankets. Aiko stood near the second truck with 3 other women, all civilians being relocated. They clutched small bags of belongings. Their faces showed exhaustion and hope mixed together. Markham supervised the loading. He checked manifests and gave orders. Everything was official and proper. No room for accusations or complications. Elijah kept his distance. He could not approach her directly, but he wanted to see her off, wanted to know she actually left safely. Aiko turned and scanned the crowd of soldiers near the yard. She was looking for him. Their eyes met across the distance. She did not wave. Neither did he. But acknowledgement passed between them. A relief worker helped her climb into the truck bed. She sat near the back. Other women settled beside her. They talked quietly among themselves. planning for uncertain futures. The convoy commander shouted orders. Drivers climbed into their cabs. Engines revved. Black smoke coughed from exhaust pipes. The convoy was ready to move. Aiko looked at Elijah one last time. She bowed her head slightly. He returned the gesture by placing his hand over his heart again. The same farewell as last night. The trucks rolled forward. Wheels crunched over gravel. Dust rose in clouds behind them. The convoy moved slowly through the camp gates, turned onto the main road, began the journey north. Elijah watched until the trucks disappeared around a bend. Dust settled back to earth. The sound of engines faded into morning bird song. She was gone. He stood there for a moment longer. Filipino workers moved past him. Soldiers headed to morning formation. The camp resumed its ordinary rhythm. Everything continued as if nothing significant had happened. But something had happened. Something that changed him. He had saved one life in a war designed to destroy millions. He had chosen compassion over compliance, humanity over regulations. And for that brief time, he had connected with another person who understood what it meant to be seen as less than human. She had been the enemy. Now she was just a woman who survived, who would rebuild her life somewhere far from here. Elijah turned away from the motor yard. The sun rose higher. Morning light touched the jungle canopy. Artillery still rumbled in the distance. The war was not finished, but he had won a small victory that mattered more than medals. He headed toward the medic tents. Morning duty waited. Injured soldiers needed care. The work never ended. But today he carried something with him that had not been there before. Hope. Elijah walked slowly back along the perimeter road. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust. The same path where he had made his morning rounds 2 weeks ago. The same fence line where everything had started. He stopped at the section where he first found Aiko. The brush had grown back already. Jungle vines crept through the rusted wire. No evidence remained that a starving woman had collapsed there, that a soldier had made an impossible choice. But Elijah remembered. He would always remember. The moment he pushed through that gap in the fence. The moment he saw her eyes expecting death. The moment he decided to save her instead of following regulations. Other soldiers passed by on the road. They did not look at him. Black medics were part of the landscape, invisible until needed, dismissed when not. The segregation continued. The racism persisted. Nothing about that had changed. But Elijah had changed. He understood something now that he had not fully grasped before. Regulations and orders and military protocols. They were not absolute. They were choices made by men. And men could make different choices. He had chosen compassion, had chosen to see humanity in someone designated as the enemy, had risked everything to protect one life. And somehow he had survived. So had she. Artillery boomed from the northern front. The war pushed forward. Battles raged inland. Men died in jungle clearings and on mountain ridges. The machinery of destruction ground on without pause. But here on this perimeter road, one small rebellion had succeeded. One small act of defiance had saved 2 lives, his and hers. Maybe that was all anyone could do. Save one life at a time. Choose humanity when the system demanded otherwise. Elijah turned toward the rising sun. Morning heat was building. The day's work waited. Injured soldiers, medical supplies, the endless routine of a segregated medic in a war that valued some lives over others. He thought of Aiko heading north toward safety. Thought of her smile in the medical tent. Thought of her hand resting briefly in his. Connection forged across impossible divisions. "Be safe," he whispered again to the jungle, to the morning air, to the memory of a woman whose name meant child of love in a language he did not speak. Then he turned fully toward the sun. straightened his shoulders, picked up his medical bag, and headed back to duty. The camp waited. The war continued. But in his chest burned something that had not been there before. A quiet knowledge. A moral victory carved from the darkest hours. He had saved her. And in saving her, he had saved something in himself. Something the war tried to destroy in all of them. The ability to see another person and respond with mercy instead of hate. That was worth more than any medal, worth more than any commendation. It was worth everything. And it was enough.